Some people carry a kind of strength you would never notice at first glance. They show up to work, they smile politely, they answer messages, they move through the ordinary choreography of life as if nothing inside them has ever truly broken. And yet, somewhere in their past, something did. They have known emotional pain that rearranges the structure of a person, the kind that collapses certainty, trust, and identity all at once. The kind that leaves you sitting in silence, realizing that the world you believed in no longer exists. The kind that empties meaning from familiar places and makes even ordinary mornings feel heavy and unreal. But they are still here, still standing, still choosing to participate in a life that once felt impossible to continue. What makes them different is not that they avoided suffering, it's that they endured it, and something within them reorganized around that survival. Not louder, not harder, but deeper, quieter, more grounded. You can often recognize them by a certain steadiness, a softness without fragility, a calm that doesn't come from comfort, but from having already faced what they feared most. They listen without rushing. They hold space without needing to fix. Their presence carries the memory of storms survived. Some people don't just survive emotional pain. They become someone new inside it, carrying a quiet strength you can't see, but can feel when you're near them. Extreme emotional pain does not simply hurt, it dismantles. It reaches beneath daily stress and ordinary sadness and begins to unravel the quiet assumptions a person has always lived inside. The belief that relationships are safe, that efforts will be met with care, that the future will resemble the past. When profound loss, betrayal, abandonment, or psychological trauma occurs, these assumptions fracture all at once. This is why survivors often describe the experience not just as suffering, but as disorientation. The world feels altered. Familiar people seem distant. Even the self no longer feels continuous. Psychologically, it is not only grief or fear they are facing, it is the collapse of an inner map that once made life predictable. In this state, the nervous system shifts into survival. Attention narrows, trust contracts, emotional energy is redirected toward endurance rather than growth. Many people move through days on a kind of internal emergency mode, doing what must be done while carrying an invisible rupture inside. From the outside, functioning may continue. Inside, however, identity itself is being questioned. Who am I now that this has happened? What remains when what I relied on is gone? Extreme emotional pain therefore does something paradoxical. It destabilizes the person, and at the same time exposes the deepest layers of their psychological structure. It reveals where meaning was built, where attachment lived, where hope resided. And once those foundations are shaken, the self cannot return unchanged. Before any growth, before any strength, there is first this, the shattering. There is a form of vitality that does not come from joy, confidence, or success. It emerges from something far less visible, the act of continuing after emotional devastation. We might call this dark vitality, a life force shaped in the aftermath of ruin, when a person has faced psychological collapse and still somehow reorganized enough to go on. This kind of strength is often misunderstood. It is not the triumphant resilience we celebrate in inspirational narratives. It is quieter, more complex, and carries the memory of fracture within it. Dark vitality does not deny suffering, and it does not suggest that pain is beneficial or deserved. Rather, it describes a process in which the human psyche adapts under extreme strain, developing new forms of endurance, perception, and inner structure. Psychologically, this overlaps with what trauma research calls post-traumatic growth. The possibility that, through struggling with overwhelming experience, individuals may reconstruct meaning, identity, and priorities in ways that did not exist before. But dark vitality emphasizes something subtler: the energy that returns not because life became easier, but because the self learned how to exist alongside what cannot be undone. Imagine a landscape after wildfire. The terrain is darker, scarred, altered. Yet over time, new growth appears, not identical to what was lost, but rooted in the changed soil. In much the same way, survivors often carry forward a strength that was not present before the rupture. It is not brightness after darkness. It is life that has incorporated darkness. Strength here is born from ruin and forever marked by it. It can sound almost contradictory to say that extreme emotional pain can contribute to strength. Pain, after all, overwhelms, destabilizes, and exhausts. Yet psychological and neuroscientific research suggests that under certain conditions, the human mind does not simply endure trauma, it reorganizes in response to it. The strength that sometimes follows suffering is not produced by pain itself, but by the adaptive processes the brain and psyche engage to survive it. When a person encounters overwhelming emotional stress, the brain's threat and regulation systems are pushed beyond familiar limits. Assumptions fail, expectations collapse, and the nervous system enters prolonged survival activation. During this period, individuals are forced, often without choice, to confront questions of meaning, identity, and reality at a depth rarely reached in ordinary life. This intense cognitive and emotional processing can initiate what psychologists call meaning-making, the attempt to integrate the experience into a coherent narrative about the self and the world. If this integration begins to occur, several shifts can follow. Perception becomes more nuanced because previous certainties have been challenged. Priorities reorganize as superficial goals lose relevance compared to what proved truly essential. Self-efficacy can increase not through confidence, but through lived evidence. I survived something I believed would break me. Over time, neural pathways associated with regulation and perspective-taking may strengthen as the individual repeatedly practices tolerating distress and reconstructing interpretation. This is why pain does not automatically create strength. When trauma remains unprocessed or unsupported, it more often leads to fragmentation, avoidance, or chronic threat sensitivity. But when the mind gradually metabolizes the experience through reflection, support, or internal adaptation, suffering can become organized into knowledge. The person does not become strong because pain was good, but because their psychological system learned under pressure to transform chaos into structure. Strength, in this sense, is not the product of pain. It is the product of adaptation to pain. One of the most profound changes in people who have endured extreme emotional pain is not visible in behavior, but in perception. Their inner emotional world often becomes wider, more layered, and more precise. Having moved through states such as despair, helplessness, grief, or abandonment, they no longer experience feelings as simple categories. Emotions acquire texture, weight, and nuance. Before deep suffering, many people relate to sadness, fear, or joy in relatively straightforward ways. Afterward, these same emotions can carry multiple shades at once. A moment of happiness may be accompanied by awareness of its fragility. Relief may coexist with memory of what was lost. Compassion may arise quickly because the survivor recognizes echoes of familiar pain in others. This expanded range does not necessarily make life easier, but it often makes perception more accurate and more human. Survivors frequently develop a heightened capacity for emotional recognition. Having navigated intense internal states, they become sensitive to subtle cues in voice, posture, or silence. They may sense distress before it is spoken, or understand contradictions within another person's feelings. Importantly, this depth tends to soften judgment. When one has personally experienced psychological collapse, the struggles of others appear less as weakness and more as understandable responses to unseen burdens. There is also a shift in how positive emotion is understood. Joy is no longer taken for granted. It is recognized as contingent, temporary, and therefore precious. Small moments, safety, connection, calm, may carry disproportionate significance because they are felt against the memory of their absence. In this way, emotional depth includes both sorrow and appreciation, vulnerability and resilience. The survivor's inner world, then, is not simply heavier, it is larger. They do not just feel more pain, they feel more life in all its complexity, contradiction, and fragile beauty. Extreme emotional pain often alters not only how survivors feel, but how they understand people themselves. Before profound betrayal, abandonment, or loss, many individuals carry quiet assumptions about human reliability, that care will be reciprocated, that loyalty is stable, that love protects. When these expectations are broken, the injury is not only relational, it is philosophical. The person must confront a more complicated reality about human nature. Survivors frequently emerge with fewer illusions. They recognize that people can be both loving and limited, devoted and inconsistent, sincere yet capable of harm. This does not necessarily lead to cynicism. In fact, for many it produces a steadier form of acceptance. They no longer demand perfection from others or from relationships because they have witnessed how vulnerability, fear, and self-interest shape behavior. Human beings appear less idealized but also more comprehensible. This clearer perception can deepen tolerance. When someone has experienced their own fragility, moments of need, confusion, or emotional overwhelm, they understand that weakness is not an anomaly, but a condition of being human. Others' failures are seen in context rather than as absolute character verdicts. Judgment softens, replaced by a kind of sober compassion. At the same time, the loss of illusion brings realism about risk. Survivors know trust is meaningful, precisely because it is not guaranteed. They recognize that care must be mutual to endure, and so their view of human nature becomes neither naive nor bitter, but grounded. People are capable of beauty and of damage, often at once. To see humanity without illusion is not to lose faith, it is to hold faith within reality. For many survivors, one of the most consequential shifts after extreme emotional pain is the emergence of firmer psychological boundaries. When a person has experienced violation, abandonment, or emotional neglect, they are forced to confront a difficult truth. Safety cannot depend entirely on others. Somewhere in the aftermath, the self begins to assume a role it may never have held before: protector. This shift rarely appears as dramatic assertiveness. More often, it develops quietly through accumulated recognition. The survivor notices what feels harmful, what drains energy, what compromises dignity. Situations or relationships once tolerated out of hope or fear begin to register differently. There is less willingness to override inner signals for the sake of approval or attachment. Boundaries form not from anger, but from clarity. Alongside this boundary formation, self-trust begins to strengthen. Having endured what once seemed unendurable, the individual carries lived evidence of their own endurance. They know at a bodily level that they can survive emotional rupture, loneliness, or uncertainty. This knowledge does not remove fear, but it changes its meaning. Fear becomes a state that can be navigated, not a force that defines the self. Importantly, this new self-reliance does not eliminate the need for connection. Survivors still seek support, intimacy, and belonging. The difference is structural. Their stability no longer rests entirely outside them. There is an internal reference point that remains even when others falter. Boundaries and self-trust, then, are not defenses against love. They are the conditions that make safe love possible again. One of the least understood realities of surviving extreme emotional pain is that strength and sensitivity often grow together. From the outside, survivors may appear more resilient, capable, steady, composed under pressure, and in many ways, they are. They have endured experiences that once felt unsurvivable. They know they can withstand rupture, loss, and disorientation. But internally, another change often unfolds at the same time: increased emotional sensitivity. Pain does not simply harden the psyche, it refines it. Having once encountered profound vulnerability, the survivor's nervous system becomes more attuned to threat, absence, and relational shifts. They may notice distance sooner, feel loss more sharply, or anticipate endings more quickly than before. What others experience as minor tension can register for them as meaningful risk. This is not fragility in the ordinary sense. It is perception shaped by memory. This is the paradox. The same experiences that cultivated endurance also expanded sensitivity. Survivors can hold intense emotion without collapse, yet they may also feel deeply affected by subtleties others overlook. They can remain present in crisis, yet still carry heightened awareness of how easily connection can fracture. Strength and tenderness coexist, sometimes uneasily. There is also a shadow side to this adaptation. Trust may rebuild slowly. Emotional scars can persist as caution. Even in safety, parts of the psyche may remain alert, scanning for echoes of past harm. Relationships can feel precious and precarious at once. The survivor does not fear feeling. They fear losing again what once mattered. And yet, this sensitivity is not merely residue of injury. It is also evidence of continued openness. Despite what was endured, the person did not seal themselves entirely against attachment or meaning. They remain responsive, affected, alive to connection. Survivors are stronger, yes, but also more capable of feeling the full weight of being human. After extreme emotional pain, the self rarely returns to what it was. Something fundamental has been disrupted. Beliefs, attachments, identity structures that once organized experience. What follows is not recovery in the sense of restoration, but reconstruction. Survivors often move through a gradual psychological process that begins with shattering and ends, if integration occurs, with a reorganized sense of self. The first phase is collapse. Assumptions fail, meaning dissolves, and emotional continuity fractures. People describe feeling unreal, fragmented, or emptied of former identity. In response, the psyche shifts into survival mode. Functioning narrows to essentials, getting through hours, days, responsibilities. During this period, deeper questions often remain suspended because the nervous system is occupied with endurance. Over time, however, the need for coherence re-emerges. Survivors begin to search for meaning, not necessarily explanation, but placement. Where does this experience belong in my life story? What does it say about me, about others, about the world? This stage initiates reconstruction. New interpretations form, priorities shift, and identity reorganizes around what has been learned or revealed through suffering. Integration marks a later phase. The trauma is no longer the entirety of the self, yet it is not denied or erased. It becomes one chapter among others, woven into a broader narrative that includes survival, adaptation, and continuity. The person recognizes both who they were and who they have become. They did not return to their former self. They assembled a different one, shaped by rupture, but no longer defined solely by it. There is one final truth often seen in people who have survived extreme emotional pain. After everything, they still choose to remain open to life. They have seen betrayal, loss, or collapse closely enough to know that hope is never guaranteed. And yet, many do not become cynical or closed. They continue to care, to connect, to believe that meaning is still possible. This is not naivete. It is moral resilience, the decision to let experience deepen rather than harden the heart, to hold realism without surrendering compassion, to acknowledge darkness without living inside it. Survivors who choose this path embody a quiet courage. They rebuild trust knowing it can break again, and still decide that connection is worth the risk. If parts of this reflection feel familiar, you may carry your own form of hard-won strength. And if you do, you're not alone here. Consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts below. Your story, your insight, or simply the truth you've learned about yourself after surviving what once felt unbearable. Thank you for watching.